Welcome to our deep dive. Today, we're taking a close look at OpenAI's Economic Blueprint.
Oh, this is a fascinating one. It's their vision for how AI could completely transform America, economically and even socially. OpenAI argues that we need to learn from history and make sure we don't stifle AI innovation with unnecessary roadblocks.
What does OpenAI think we should be doing instead?
Well, they really emphasize what they call democratic AI, a system that's rooted in U.S. values, free markets, individual freedom, and responsible use. They believe the U.S. is in a unique position to not just develop AI, but to shape how it's used globally.
Winning the AI race, they call it. And they seem particularly concerned about competition from China, right?
Yeah, they point out there's a ton of money, over $175 billion globally, just waiting to be invested in AI.
Wow, that's a lot of cash.
And they want to make sure a big chunk of that investment and the influence that comes with it lands here in the U.S.
It sounds like they're not just talking about some friendly competition. This is about global influence and which values will shape the AI of the future.
Exactly. It's about what those frontier models, the most advanced AI systems, will be capable of.
That does sound pretty powerful, but wouldn't sharing that kind of technology, especially with other countries, raise some big national security questions?
Absolutely. And OpenAI acknowledges that. They even propose something that's sure to spark some debate. They suggest sharing national security information with U.S. AI companies.
That's interesting. What are the potential upsides and downsides of something like that?
Well, the idea is that it would allow U.S. companies to build more robust and secure AI systems, kind of like giving them a head start. But of course, there are concerns about transparency, accountability, and the potential for misuse.
Yeah, if this technology is that powerful, we want to make sure it's in the right hands.
Right. And OpenAI is already working on ways to address those concerns. They have something called the preparedness framework.
What's that?
It's their internal process for identifying and mitigating potential risks. They're also using something called red teaming.
Red teaming?
It's basically like hiring ethical hackers to try and break into their systems and find vulnerabilities.
So they're trying to stay one step ahead of the bad guys.
Exactly. But even with all those safeguards, AI is going to have a huge impact on all our lives.
Not just on a global scale, but on a personal one, too.
Right. And OpenAI recognizes that. They say we need clear guidelines for how it's used. They call them rules of the road for AI.
Okay, I like that analogy, rules of the road. So what are some of the key areas they're focusing on?
They highlight three main things: protecting children, making sure people can tell what's real in a world of AI-generated content, and giving you control over how AI uses your data.
Those are all important questions. It's like we're at the beginning of a new frontier, both exciting and a little bit daunting at the same time.
That's a great way to put it. And OpenAI has some interesting ideas for how to navigate this new landscape. For example, they propose using states as laboratories of democracy.
Laboratories of democracy. What does that mean?
Well, different states could experiment with different AI solutions for everyday problems, kind of like running pilot programs.
Oh, I see. Like trying out different approaches and seeing what works best.
Exactly. But to make any of this happen, we're going to need a major upgrade to our infrastructure, right?
That makes sense. You can't build a digital future without the right foundation.
And OpenAI is very clear about that. They argue that investing in infrastructure is absolutely essential for the U.S. to maintain leadership in AI. They even believe it could lead to a national reindustrialization, creating lots of new jobs.
Reindustrialization, that's a big word. What kind of infrastructure are we talking about?
They highlight four key things: chips, data, energy, and talent.
Okay, so the building blocks of the AI age.
Right. And they have some pretty bold ideas for how to boost our capacity in each of those areas.
Oh, like what?
Well, one idea is creating something they call AI economic zones, special areas with streamlined regulations to attract AI companies and make it easier to build things.
So like Silicon Valley, but for AI.
Exactly. They also talk about building a national AI infrastructure highway to connect regional power grids and make sure we have enough energy to support all these powerful AI systems.
Those are some pretty big ideas. But how realistic are they? What are the potential downsides?
It's definitely a bold vision, and OpenAI acknowledges that there are going to be some hurdles to overcome. One of the biggest they point out is energy.
Yeah, training and running those massive AI models takes a ton of power, doesn't it?
It does, and that's why they argue for a pretty major shift in how we think about energy in the U.S. They're not just saying we need more energy, they're saying we need cleaner energy, especially renewable sources.
So they're connecting the dots between AI and the need for a more sustainable energy infrastructure. That makes sense.
Right. They even get into the specifics, suggesting things like increasing federal spending on things like power lines and data transmission, streamlining the approval process, too.
So basically, a pretty big overhaul of the energy grid.
You got it.
Yeah.
They see it as essential for powering this whole AI revolution.
Wow, it's a lot to wrap your head around. This vision of theirs really touches on so many different aspects of our lives: energy, technology, national security, even the environment.
It's interconnected, right? OpenAI's point is that we can't think about AI in isolation. It's all tied together.
One thing that stuck with me from last time was this idea of federal backstops for those big AI infrastructure projects. Can you remind me what those are again?
Sure. Basically, it's the government stepping in to help reduce the risk for private companies that might want to invest in these projects.
Sort of like an insurance policy, but for AI innovation.
Exactly. It's a way to encourage companies to take on those big, ambitious projects that might be seen as too risky otherwise.
Interesting. So it's not just about throwing money at the problem, it's about creating the right incentives for investment. But even with that, these projects are going to take time, right? Years, maybe even decades. What about the more immediate concerns people have about AI? Like, will it take our jobs? Or how do we know what's real in a world where AI can create almost anything?
You're hitting on some key points there, and OpenAI doesn't shy away from those issues. In fact, they stress that we need to start addressing those concerns now, not just in some distant future.
So how do they propose we do that?
Well, they talk about creating what they call a digital citizenship for the AI age. It's about everyone, individuals, companies, governments, taking responsibility for using AI ethically and thoughtfully.
So kind of like creating a social contract for how we interact with this powerful technology.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where the rules of the road come in.
Right, those guidelines for how to develop and use AI responsibly. But are those really enough to ensure things don't go off the rails? I mean, technology can be unpredictable, right?
It definitely can be. And that's why OpenAI is really pushing for this idea of transparency and ongoing dialogue. They see their blueprint as a living document, something that needs to evolve as our understanding of AI grows.
So it's not about having all the answers right now, but rather about being willing to adapt and learn as we go.
Precisely. They emphasize that this isn't just an issue for tech companies or policymakers to figure out. It's something we all need to be a part of.
That makes sense. After all, it's going to impact all of our lives. But to really get involved in that conversation, people need to understand the basics, right?
Absolutely. And OpenAI stresses that education is key. They call for a nationwide AI education strategy, starting all the way back in schools.
So it's not just about teaching kids how to code, but about giving them a broader understanding of what AI is and how it works.
Exactly. It's about AI literacy for everyone. They believe a skilled and diverse AI workforce is essential, not just for economic competitiveness, but for ensuring that everyone can benefit from AI's potential.
That makes sense. But even if we do all that right, invest in education, build the infrastructure, create ethical guidelines, there are still those lingering worries about potential risks. What about the possibility of AI being used for malicious purposes? Or even worse, becoming a threat to humanity itself? Those sci-fi scenarios are hard to shake.
I hear you. Those are some big what-ifs that we can't just ignore. OpenAI definitely acknowledges that there's some serious risks we need to address.
That's good to hear. At least they're not sugarcoating it. So what are they most concerned about?
One of the big ones, and this is something a lot of people worry about, is the potential for AI to displace jobs. As AI gets smarter and more capable, it could automate tasks that are currently done by humans.
Yeah, the whole robots taking our jobs scenario. It's like a classic sci-fi trope, but now it's starting to feel a little too real.
It's a legitimate concern, and OpenAI doesn't dismiss it. They say that some jobs will inevitably be lost as AI becomes more widespread.
Okay, so they're not denying it, but what do they propose we do about it? I mean, we can't just sit back and let millions of people lose their jobs.
They actually offer some concrete solutions. One big one is investing heavily in education and workforce development, starting all the way back in schools.
So it's about preparing people for the jobs of the future, the jobs that AI can't do.
Exactly. They talk about reskilling programs, apprenticeships, all sorts of initiatives to help people adapt to this changing job market. They also emphasize the need for things like stronger social safety nets to support people who might be displaced by automation.
So it's about providing a cushion for those who might fall through the cracks. Makes sense. But even if we create all these new jobs and support systems, what about fairness? Will everyone benefit equally from AI, or will it just exacerbate existing inequalities?
That's another huge concern and one that OpenAI takes seriously. We talk about the risk of creating an even bigger gap between the haves and the have-nots if we're not careful. They argue that access to AI technology and the opportunities it creates needs to be equitable.
So it's not just about technological advancement, but about social justice, too.
Right. They see a real danger in creating a world where only the wealthy and privileged benefit from AI. They call for a focus on what they call democratic AI, a system that's designed to be fair, transparent, and accountable.
Democratic AI, I like the sound of that. But how do we actually make that happen? How do we prevent AI from being used for harmful purposes, whether by individuals, corporations, or even governments?
Well, OpenAI believes that strong regulations and ethical guidelines are essential. They talk about things like rigorous testing and auditing of AI systems, clear accountability frameworks, and mechanisms for addressing bias and discrimination.
So it's about building in safeguards from the start, not just reacting after something bad happens.
Exactly. They also highlight the need for international collaboration to establish global standards for AI development and use. They recognize that this isn't just a national issue, it's a global one.
Makes sense. But all this talk about regulations and guidelines, doesn't it kind of stifle innovation? I mean, don't we need to give AI developers the freedom to experiment and push boundaries?
That's a valid point, and it's a tension that OpenAI acknowledges. They're not advocating for overly restrictive regulations that would stifle creativity. They believe it's about finding the right balance, encouraging innovation while also putting safeguards in place to prevent harm.
Okay, I see their point. It's like we want to give AI room to grow, but we also want to make sure it grows in the right direction.
Exactly. And they believe that open dialogue and collaboration are key to finding that right balance. They're actively engaging with policymakers, researchers, and civil society organizations to try and shape the conversation around AI ethics in governance.
That's encouraging to hear, but ultimately, the future of AI isn't just up to OpenAI or any single organization, is it?
Absolutely not. It's a collective responsibility. It's up to all of us, individuals, communities, governments, businesses, to decide what role we want AI to play in our lives and in society.
So what does this all mean for our listeners? OpenAI believes we're entering the intelligence age, an era where AI will fundamentally reshape the world as we know it. What do you think that future will look like? What role do you want to play in shaping it?
Those are the big questions, aren't they? And the answers aren't simple. It's going to require all of us to engage in these conversations, to learn about AI, to think critically about its potential benefits and risks, and to make our voices heard.
So keep those brains buzzing, folks. And that wraps up our deep dive into OpenAI's Economic Blueprint.